Hi guys, and welcome back to the Intermediate Chess course. Last week we were talking a little bit about what it means to capture and circumstances in which it's good to capture an enemy piece and the circumstances where it's not so good, in particular if you're going to fall into some kind of trap. So it can be quite difficult to judge when it's appropriate to capture an enemy piece. But often it's good to take a bit more time to make sure that you're not falling into some kind of tactic or horrible trap. Now, today, we'll start with a puzzle, but I thought it would be useful for you guys to learn a bit more about some different types of opening. Because I realize in this course I haven't really talked that much about openings. And I think I'd like to talk about how important it is to create a kind of solid structure at the beginning. Often you'll find that your opponent may immediately try to attack you, but if you have a solid foundation in your game, then it's going to be really easy for you to repel them, to stop them from getting a checkmate or winning material early on in the game. Anyway, a puzzle to begin with. So I'll just share my screen and we should come to here. So again, if you want to set the board up, please do that. I'm going to show you a move by white, which is this one. And you're going to have to find out the best response. Okay, see if you can work that out. We notice we have this annoying fork to deal with. So pause the video and work out the best response. Okay, well, I think there's a couple of things you may have considered. I think perhaps option number one may be to take this pawn. We get 1 point, but then we would lose 5. And then once the rook returns to take the knight, we would gain another 3. But 3 plus 1 is 4 is not quite equal to 5. So although that's an okay move, there's actually a much better one. And it's bishop back to c8. So that's something that you may not have seen because it's an unusual kind of move. It's a backwards diagonal move, which is probably the hardest kind of move to see. So not only is this a sort of an unusual kind of move, but it's also doing a trick which is also diagonally against the rook on a6 and the knight on b7. So let's say, for example, that white did take one of these rooks. Well, we wouldn't recapture the knight with our other rook. We would just simply take this rook. So, for example, if knight takes rook, then bishop takes this rook. And notice that this knight here is trapped. Therefore, another counter move might be something like rook here, because then after rook takes knight, bishop takes, rook takes bishop. Getting all my pieces muddled up there. So you can see here the value of a counter-attack. Notice the counter-attack is, if we go back to the beginning, here is an attack, a tactic, and here is the counter-attack. We're not moving these pieces. We're creating an equal threat or one which is bigger that the opponent is obliged to deal with in some way, or in this case, accept equality. Okay, so that's the value of a counterattack. I'm going to go on to sort of a more general kind of subject, which is how to create a solid structure in the opening. Now, I realize that I've kind of given a bit of instruction from a white point of view. And I think most people, or most kids, enjoy playing with the white pieces because white gets the first move and therefore gets to kind of dictate the game a little bit from the start. And I'd say it's perhaps a little easier to play with white, therefore. But as black, we sometimes have to adopt a different kind of strategy because we have the second move, and therefore in the initial part of the game, we have to react to what white is doing. So I think we'll divide things up into two different sections. Section 1 will be about this move, pawn to e4, and how to react to that. And then option number 2 will be pawn to d4, and how to react to that. So notice that moves such as, these kind of side moves, this is not really something we need to prepare for, because all we can do is we can just control the center, get our pawns into the center, get our knights out, and we'll have a fairly easy game to begin with, okay? Chances are, if your opponent is doing using a wing pawn to start the game off, they're probably not that experienced, and we should be able to overpower them if they make a mistake. So we don't need to worry about that too much. So let's start off with a move such as e4. Well, I think here there's a number of options that you could choose. But probably the two main moves are pawn to c5, which is called the Sicilian defense, and pawn to e5, which has not really got a name. It's called a king's pawn opening, because both sides have moved the king's pawn. I think what we'll do is we'll look at the king's pawn opening to begin with, and then we'll go and look at the Sicilian defense later. So king's pawn opening with the two king's pawns is probably the most solid way to begin the game as black. It's very likely then that white will bring out a knight to attack this pawn. We have a number of ways we could protect the pawn. I'll show you what happens after this. You might want to pause the video and imagine what white would play here. The move that white would try, I think, is actually a sacrifice, surprisingly. Knight takes pawn. After pawn takes, we have the move queen to h5 check. And this is bad news for two reasons. If we block the check, then we have something called a zigzag attack, attacking the king and the rook. And we would lose that rook for sure. If we go for something a little different, so if we don't block and we move our king, well, then we've got the same kind of problem. The queen comes across to take this pawn. We've only got one move. And then white brings out this bishop, and the king gradually gets shunted across to the side of the board. And you'll notice this move d4, a discovered check. And, well, black is not long for this world, because after this move, we have the move h4. Okay? So this is not a good route to go down. It's not something you want to get into. So therefore, after the move that we talked about, it's better not to play this. Better not to play the move f6. But to play this one, knight to c6. Now, we could play a move such as pawn to d6 or bishop to d6 to defend this pawn, but I think that we're going to bring our knights out anyway. Now, the knights tend to come out quickly, and the reason is because if they come to these squares, they can control the center. Now, I think you guys know that already, but it's worth emphasizing that because the knights actually are normally best placed on these four squares. That's not to say they can't move to other squares. You may see knights end up on these four squares sometimes. And that's perfectly fine too, because they can protect each other. For example, one knight here, one knight there. That would be okay. But most likely, if they're on these squares, they can attack into enemy territory. And I suppose just a bit more flexible. So we would see a move such as maybe bishop out like this. And I would recommend playing our bishop out too. So playing our bishop to here. So once we've got this kind of structure in place, it means that we need to think about castling. So notice that although it looks like I'm copying white's moves, there's not a whole lot that white can do to attack us. We've got a pawn in the center, we're developing, and on the next move, perhaps once once this move has been played, we could play a move such as knight out here. It looks as though we're copying what white's doing, but that's not a problem. We're just, as long as we understand why the moves are being played, it's okay to kind of not so much copy, but use the same kind of strategy as what white is doing. However, once we've castled, it's probably best to pay a little bit more attention to white's strategy specifically. So let's say that white does this move. What is white going to do next? Pause the video and see if you can work it out. I think it's very likely that white is going to play bishop out here. The annoying thing then is that there's a pin. And with the idea that the knight may come into this square, putting pressure on the piece, on this knight, we're going to probably have our king side opened up. So let me show you what I mean. If we just sort of ignore, we could ignore, we're copying. That wouldn't be good in this situation, I don't think, because after this move, then suddenly we find that this knight here is coming in to d5 to put pressure on the pinned piece. And if we just copy what white is doing, that we're always going to have the second move here. It's much better to come up with your own idea rather than to just copy blindly. So after pawn to d3, how will we stop the bishop coming to this square? I think a move that you guys can remember is this one, pawn to h6, to stop the bishop coming to here to control our knight and to pin our knight. So once we've done that, we can consider, first of all, getting our bishop out this way, trying to do the same thing, or coming to here. And then, if we can, trying to swap off white's bishop. So for example, we could play, let's say that white played this move. Then it's possible we could then defend our pawn in the center, rook e1, and then maybe we can attack white's bishop here. That would be perfectly good. Notice that if the bishop goes back, we can still capture it. And consider that the bishop is probably worth 3¼ We like to rate it a tiny bit higher than a knight normally. So if we can get hold of a bishop for a knight, then that's always going to benefit us. I think in eight circumstances out of 10, that's going to help us a lot. So just to recap, this little move here, h6, is worth playing, especially when you notice that the bishop may come here. And also the move knight a5, which will you can win the bishop this way. Notice if the bishop comes here, we can just take it. Okay. So I would advise a move such as this. You can even perhaps take the bishop if it doesn't move. So let's go back to the very beginning. There's another alternative, which is c5. I would recommend that you look up under the watch button, look up video library and type in the Sicilian defense, okay? Because then you can see how it works. What do we do therefore if we have to face d4? Well, there's less of a problem here about copying because there's not so many tricks that white can do, such as the copycat trap you have against d4. I would recommend simply doing this. Now, it's likely that white will try to bring out the knight, so we can do the same. That's perfectly fine. You may see a move such as pawn to c4, which is called the Queen's Gambit. Now, again, you can look that up under the video library, under here. Type in Queen's Gambit. But, you know, if white doesn't want to do that, then it's possible they could bring out their bishop. Now, there's nothing wrong at all with just, I'm not going to say the word copying, but doing kind of copying in a way that you understand it. So don't copy blindly, but you can use the opponent's strategy in the same way that they are. So just bring out your pieces. So again, e6, so e3, e6. Again, perfectly good move. And again, if you now have a move such as this, suddenly we have an attack on one of our pieces. So it's worth spending more time at this point, because if you just copy blindly, it may not end well, because white has got the first capture, white gets basically an extra move. So better, therefore, once there's a kind of a bit of tension here, bishop against bishop like that, it's worth either capturing, if you feel that's a good idea, or perhaps retreating. That would also be good. Let's say that we capture, maybe the queen will capture, and then after that, it will be perfectly okay to do the same sort of thing. You don't have to do that. You could play a move such as bishop to e7, and then simply get out your pieces this way. You could move your knight here and here, or more likely knight d7, and after that you can push your pawn forward and castle. Just to recap, you can effectively copy a little bit. I would recommend getting the knight to d7, the bishop to e7 or d6, and then castling. Okay? If you need to look this up, I would recommend just looking up something such as the London system on this function, the video library function. If you're interested in learning a bit more about the, we'll call it the Queen's Gambit, which is this opening, then I would recommend typing that in. But the most important thing is to create a solid structure. That means getting pieces out and ensuring that we castle early. That is very important. Okay, I'm going to unshare my screen. I realized that was a bit more of a general lesson, and I think sometimes it's worth just looking into the opening a bit more in depth. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with just looking online for a video, clicking on one that you like. So let's say something to do with the Queen's Gambit. You can just type that into Lichess and learn a bit about that yourself. And I think that's a very good way to improve your chess, just by watching a lot of chess videos. Okay? So again, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll catch you next time on the next video. See you soon.